Here's what the change curve looks like. We very quickly find ourselves in denial. You'll notice now that your motivation starts to drop. Once you accept it, you can start to come to terms with it. There is no shortcut because we're all human beings, right? Until something else comes to rock the boat, we have a new beginning. This is beliefs and values and core values. That's where this lives. The situation is frozen. Before we can change, before we can move, we have to unfreeze. It's going to need unfreezing, moving, and freezing. The guy's a genius, right? Hi there. Change management is hard. It's really hard. It's hard. It's complex. It's challenging. It's unpredictable. And here's the kicker. It's always lurking just around the corner. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your attitude towards change, change is an integral and an inevitable part of leadership. And that means, if you think about it, that makes change management a leader's full-time job. Whether that change is driven by, internal decisions or external forces, the ability to effectively navigate change is a critical leadership skill. So how good are you at doing that? Well, according to a recent study by McKinsey, 70% of most change initiatives fail. 70%, and that's often because leaders lack the tools, strategies, the know-how to navigate the process successfully. So we've got some work to do. You probably think you're pretty good at change, and you probably are. Most people seem to think that they're great drivers, but if you've ever been around Miami, like I have, you'll know that that's not true. So, some work to do. When leaders approach change thoughtfully, intentionally, purposefully, and with some kind of proper understanding of it and a plan, they can transform disruption into growth. And that's the key, right? So thankfully, there are a bunch of proven leadership models and tools to help us to do just that. There's two that we particularly like. The first one is Kurt Lewin's change model. So if you're not familiar with Kurt Lewin's change model, we'll give you a little bit about that today, and maybe you could do some more reading around it. And then of course there's our change curve that we love too, and I'm going to walk you through step by step that model today. So these models that we're going to share with you, really do give us a practical framework, because if it's not practical, it's theoretical and we can't do anything with it. So it's a practical framework for guiding our teams and ourselves perhaps through the ups and downs of change and all that inevitably brings. And I guess that's why we've put together this episode, to introduce you to the critical change management tools and the tips that'll help you to stop managing and start leading. That being said, welcome to Stop Managing and Start Leading. This is the podcast for leaders who need to stop managing and for managers who want to start leading. I'm your host, Antonio Garrido. You know me by now, but I'm the founder and president of My Daily Leadership. I'm a serial entrepreneur, business founder, and I'm a leader, just like you. I'm a 3-time author. I've led businesses from ground level startups all the way up to Fortune 60s with billions in revenue and thousands of employees. And lots of change. Now, what if I told you that the secret to exceptional leadership is easier and closer than you think, which is good news, right? But every leader and every manager really does have the potential to become exceptional, the kind of leader that they and their people and their business, well, frankly, deserve. And you're no exception. All you have to do is discover the mindsets, tools, competencies, habits, beliefs to unlock that potential. And that's where we come in. So if you want to change, see what I did there, your leadership ability for the better, why don't you just introduce yourself to that lovely button, the subscribe button. So subscribe to the My Daily Leadership YouTube channel today for more actionable insights and practical tools in our podcast episodes that drop every single Thursday, I think. And if you're listening on a podcast platform, introduce yourself to the follow button too. Both of these delicious buttons will help you level up your leadership, so do it now. I normally start with a story, but I'm going to start by talking about the song by Baz Luhrmann called Everybody's Free to Wear Sunscreen. If you know it, if you've ever heard it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you've never heard it, let's see if this whets your appetite. So the song was released in 97, if you didn't know. Go out, just check it out. Maybe even pause this, listen to that and come back. But anyway, every young adult, I think, should be obliged to hear it. It should be on school curriculums, right? It's that important. Well, the song, I say song, but the song is a spoken word track, and it features the voice of Australian actor Lee Perry. That's not really that important, but what he's doing is he's in the song, he's reciting a graduation speech style monologue over some pretty groovy ambient music. Is it a song? Is it a speech? I'm not sure, but it's a spoken word piece, and the song originated from an essay written by a journalist called Mary Schmidt, and her piece was called Advice Like Youth is Probably Wasted on the Young, which I love that, right? Now, Luhrmann set the words to this to music after its kind of viral spread, partly due to rumours that it was a real commencement speech written by Kurt Vonnegut, which it actually wasn't, but some people thought that it was. It kind of sounds like it might be, but it isn't. Anyway, the song offers life advice in a really witty, reflective and humorous way. And I guess you could say that the song emphasizes making the most out of all life's opportunities, whilst at the same time acknowledge the uncertainties and, yes, you guessed it, change along the way. The most memorable pieces of advice are, and this has nothing to do with leadership, but just the principle of change, to wear sunscreen, of course, like the clues in the name. But I think the recurring line underscores the simple but important act of protecting oneself from harm. So sunscreen, yes, but it's actually literal as well as metaphorical, I think. So what it actually does is it tells us not to worry about the future. A reminder that excessive worry is entirely unproductive and frankly gets us nowhere. So we know as we're talking about change, we are actually also talking about worry, and I'll show you why in a minute. Another thing it does is it tells us not to compare ourselves to others. And my favorite, be kind to your knees because you'll miss them when they're gone. I love that line. But at its core, of course, the song is about change. The song recognizes that change is a real constant in everybody's life, whether we're ready for it or not. So listen to these words. He says, don't worry about the future or worry, but know that worrying is as effective as trying to solve an algebra equation by chewing bubblegum. Genius. So no amount of worrying actually prevents change. It just kind of merely distracts us from living fully in the moment. That's one of the things I want to talk about in a few minutes. So I think for me, one of the most memorable insight in the song is the reflection on how life blindsides us when we least expect it. And what does that mean? It means change. The song says, the real troubles in your life are those apt to be the things that never cross your worried mind, the kind that blindsides you at 4 p.m. on some idle Tuesday. In other words, when we think we've got everything all together and everything's in its box and everything is sitting lovely, something that nobody predicted tends to blindside us at 4 p.m. on an idle Tuesday. Okay, so life is change and change is inevitable. And so we should all cultivate flexibility and resilience. Great. And the song doesn't just warn us of life surprises, it also celebrates the beauty of impermanence. So the song celebrates the idea that life is a process of change and discovery, often shaped by unexpected detours. Well, if that's the case, and it is, let's also become experts at change in life. So go listen to the song and then let's dive in. So, if you typically join us on YouTube, you'll know that we always introduce you to a critical leadership model or two. And there are two today, and we're going to draw them out because we're visual learners here at MDL. And if you're listening on a podcast because you're much more of an auditory learner, that's cool. But if you want to see the content we're about to talk through, drawn out in real time, switch over to YouTube now, or you can catch it later. And the models that we draw in this episode and or future and past episodes will also be available as a complimentary, that means free, download on our website. Pop along to allthew's.mydailyleadership.com/podcast. Okay, let's get right to the chase. Okay, so a couple of episodes ago, we introduced you to the model you can see on the screen right now, I hope. So for those listening and not watching, you're going to have to go back a couple of episodes to Leadership Honeycomb, I think it was called. But as we were going through this model, right, we talked about change. We talked about how leaders have to help people go through the change model. And if you look up here, you can see that part of lack of clarity or vision, as one of the ways that reveals itself is resistance to change. And I promised, I think at the time, that we would have a bit of a deeper dive into change, and that's today, right? So this model is also available on our download page, free download, so it'll be much neater than this because this is the model that I actually drew by hand a few sessions ago. So we're going to talk about this little area up here, change. So with that in your mind, let's start with the question, because we always start with the question. So we'll say goodbye to this for now. We'll come back to it in a couple of episodes' time when we're going to talk about how do we fix those things. So before you watch that one, and maybe even this one, if you haven't watched that one that we just talked about, please go check it out. The question that we're starting with today is, why is change so really, really, really difficult? Why is it so hard? Okay, well, before I jump into the model, let's just take a second just to think about that from from an evolutionary or biological perspective, perhaps. We are all, if you're watching this right now, it's because you're here, right? It's because you're alive. So why are you alive? Well, because you are the consequence of thousands of interactions, thousands of generations, and all of your predecessors were quite cautious individuals. Well, let's just take a second and think about that. When we as a species decided to kind of cooperate and collaborate and go from, hunter-gatherers to farming, much more of a farming lifestyle, and we're talking millions of years ago, and kind of gather ourselves into villages, right? And it's a terrible word, but, don't put the modern pejorative kind of meaning to it, but we gathered together in tribes, did we not? We are all still incredibly tribal. It's kind of stamped on our DNA. I'll explain how and why we know that in a second. But when we gathered together into villages and tribes, we knew that there had to be some kind of division of labor. What does that mean? It means that some people said, well, I'll look after the children, and some others said, well, I'll look after farming. Some others said, well, I'll do the hunting. Some others said, I'll look after security. Some others said, I'll make the pottery. And some others said, well, I'll be a builder, right? And jobs started. We didn't really have jobs until we gathered together in tribes. And what did that also mean in these little villages that we made for ourselves? Well, it meant that somebody had to be in charge, right? Somebody had to look after security, and maybe didn't use those words, but somebody had to be in charge. All right, so now we have a leader. Okay, terrific. What happened to us, do you think? What happened to those that went, a leader? I don't think so, right? I don't think I'm going to be following a leader anytime soon. I'm going to opt out of that. Thanks, but no thanks. What do you imagine happened to those individuals? Well, typically they got turfed out of the village, and something rather dreadful ate them for lunch, right? And as a consequence of something rather dreadful eating them for lunch, they didn't get to pass on their genes, right? They didn't get to have lots of babies because something rather dreadful with sharp teeth and claws ate them for lunch. In other words, the ones that were compliant and were good at doing what they were told were the ones that actually ended up being you and I, right? We are a consequence of pretty compliant genes. Normally, we all kind of behave ourselves and get along. When we don't, where do we end up? Well, our photos on the most wanted list at the post office, right? We go to jail and all of that kind of stuff because they're not entirely compliant people. But most of us are not in jail because we're fairly compliant. So what did that compliant formula look like on our DNA? It meant that we kind of did what we were told. And when somebody said it's okay to eat the blueberries, but don't eat the red berries, because we're not entirely sure what happens when we eat the red berries, right? The blueberries are safe, but the red berries are not. We went, okay, let's not try the red berries. And maybe the red berries were lovely, but maybe the red berries gave you a poorly tummy and maybe you died. So no one took the chance, right? So everybody ate the blueberries and nobody touched the red berries. Okay, so those kind of things happened. What other kind of things happened? Well, it kind of went, it's a bit like George Carlin, the American comedian, who said, anyone that drives slower than me is an idiot, and everybody that drives faster than me is a lunatic. In other words, if you do the things that I do, you're okay. If you do anything that I don't do, you're a lunatic, right? And that's also kind of stamped on our DNA. And we kind of started to say, all of the guys around here in our tribe, in our village, and in our immediate location, and our family and friends, we're all okay. It's everybody else that's a lunatic, right? And we started to not like anybody that wasn't even in our tribe. It wasn't in our village, wasn't in our gang and our clique, and wasn't, right? And that's why we became very tribal, right? We're okay. Everybody else is not okay. We don't know about those guys. So better to be safe than sorry. And that whole thing is a remnant of kind of our lizard brain, that when we first developed a brain millions of years ago, that amygdala, that piece of the brain that constantly scans the horizon looking for danger and says anything that we're not sure about is dangerous. Flee, right? Danger Will Robinson, or fight or flight or freeze, right? It's stamped on our DNA is the point I'm trying to make. So it's not really a choice, and all animals have it. You've been riding down the motorway or the freeway, the highway, and we've all seen those, poor red stains on the motorway where some small furry lovely creature was trying to make a decision. Shall I go left? Shall I go right? As the headlights were approaching, and we're frozen into indecision and ended up, a nasty stain on the motorway, right? So this is all animals, including us. We're animals too. Okay. And if you think, that was millions of years ago, we're not very tribal now. Well, you should have a look at my wife's handbag collection or shoe collection or perfume collection. She's in the Chanel tribe and she's in the Gucci tribe. I'm in the Rolex tribe and the Breitling tribe, and I'm in the Manchester City tribe. And if anybody's in the Manchester United tribe, you're lunatics, right? So that still exists today. I'm also in the Range Rover tribe, and some mad lunatics are in the BMW tribe. You get the idea. Okay, so we're not good with change. We don't like it. We don't know what it means, right? And we all know the principle, and we'll come to it in a few videos time as well, where we're going to talk about comfort zones. We know there's no growth in our comfort zone and there's no comfort in our growth zone. We know all of that too. But the thing about change is a comfort zone issue. Because whilst ever we are in our comfort zone, we're happy and safe. It's all fur-lined and it's cozy and it's lovely. But there's no change, right? Because we're in our comfort zone. Change is a comfort zone issue. So to understand change, you need to also understand comfort zones. But let's dive in. I've gone on for way too long. Let's think about change. Let's talk about the change model. I will explain how it affects you and me and everybody else. By the time we get to the end of it, hopefully you'll get it. So let's draw a graph. We're pretty good at drawing graphs around here. So I'm going to try and make a handsome fist of up along the y-axis. So we're just drawing a standard XY axis graph type thing. So up along the y-axis, we're going to do motivation and performance. Motivation and performance. And along the x-axis down here, we're going to talk about time. Okay, so I'll draw you a picky, and then we'll kind of take it apart and we'll see what it means. The change curve looks rather like, and I'm going to try not to make too dreadful a job of it, kind of looks like that. And if you're listening and not watching, I don't know how to describe that to you, other than to say, it's the change curve. So go have a look at that, right? Here's what the change curve looks like. Something happens to us, right? And it could be, so this is time 0, and suddenly we go, uh-oh, change is afoot. Something wicked this way comes, right? So there's a point when we go, I see it, something's happening. I'm not happy with it. We'll talk about why in a minute, but there's something going on. It could be that you're backing out of the car park at Publix and somebody rear ends you. Could be that. It could be that you go to the doctor and the doctor gives you bad news. Could be that. It could be that you think everything is hunky-dory and your wife or husband asks you for a divorce, or somebody splits up with you, whatever, right? Something happens. There is a trigger, and when that first trigger, when we first perceive that trigger for the very first time, we very quickly find ourselves in denial. What does that look like? Well, you're reversing out the car parking spot in Publix and somebody rear ends you. The first words that come out of your mouth are, I don't believe it, right? The first words that come out of your mouth are denial. This is impossible. This can't happen to me. Why is this happening? I can't believe it. You don't believe it. That's what denial looks like. You refuse to accept the news, right? So you start with denial. Well, not far after denial, but at a time we'll talk about in a second, there comes a point when, we'll call it realization, that you realize it is real, right? You can't just deny it. It is actually real. Where you go, first of all, you go, I can't believe it. So you deny it. And then sometime later you go, it's true, isn't it? Right? That realization that is actually true. What happens after that? When you first deny it, and then you realize there's no point in denying it because it's very obvious and here and self-evident and right on our doorstep. Well, the next thing you do is you try and resist it. And you go, no, I'm not, no, this isn't good enough. I'm not accepting it, right? You try and resist it. And you'll notice now that your motivation starts to drop. You are resisting it. There comes a time eventually when the change continues, there will come a time where eventually you accept it. Now, that point of acceptance, you don't accept what's going to happen, but you just accept what has happened. Sometimes that could be 15 seconds where you go from denial, realization, resistance to acceptance because there's nothing you can do about it. But sometimes that could take years and years and years. We all probably know. I know some people who have been divorced for 10, 12, 14 years and still can't accept it, right? They're still locked in that they're still in that resistance. They can't accept that they're divorced and their life has changed, and how could he possibly do that to me, right? And it's taken them years to get here, and maybe they are still not there. All of that up to this point here, let's say, we'll call all of that endings. Well, what's ending? Well, the thing that we had before this thing happened, right? So I guess you could argue our comfort zone, right? It's the end of the happy, warm, lovely place we were in, right? So some things happened. We get very grumpy about this whole thing. We realize it's true and it's not going away. We resist until the point we go, well, resistance is futile, and we accept it. And as I say, this here, up to this point here, could be seconds or genuinely decades. Okay. But all humans are built the same way, right? And we can't avoid it. There is no shortcut. You cannot go straight from denial to acceptance. You have to go through, even if it's a short period that you live in each of those, you have to get ultimately towards acceptance. Once you accept it, even though you don't understand it, once you accept it, you can start to come to terms with it and figure out how to get through it. So once you've accepted it, there will then come a time you realize that even though you've accepted it, doesn't mean you like it, you face a period of uncertainty. Because it's new, you don't know how to deal with it, you don't know what's next. So there's a period of uncertainty, and then you start to seek, what does this mean? You've got to try and internalize it. What have I got to learn? And eventually you'll come to a point of understanding. Eventually. And this, up to kind of this point here, to this point here, and again, this period of time can be short and fast, depending on how well you deal with change, obviously. This is kind of our transition period. So that's our transition period. And then we've figured it out, or we've tried to figure it out, we've tried to internalize it, we've tried to process it, understand it. And then there'll come to a point where we go, okay, let me commit to this. We'll make some kind of commitment to the new, right? And you'll see now how your motivation is climbing, right? And so what we now have here on in, until something else comes to rock the boat, we have a new beginning. Okay, cool. All right, and again, time then goes on until something else happens. And oftentimes, once we've made this commitment, the world is better, after that. Okay, so this denial, realization, resistance, acceptance, uncertainty, understanding, commitment can be a very long time, it can be a very short time. All right, so what's this got to do with the weather and the price of fish? Well, every human being has to go through this when there's a period of change. We cannot go straight from denial. We cannot shortcut this. We cannot go from there to there instantly. There is no shortcut because we're all human beings, right? So what is the task then? What is the role then of a leader trying to help an organization or a person transition through this change curve? Well, they've got to do two things, really. They've got to figure out, and again, this is for themselves too, sometimes they've got to look in the mirror. Instead of the change curve looking like that, for example, their job is to figure out how to minimize that and how to minimize that. So we've got to minimize, we'll call it A, we've got to minimize what we'll call B, so that we make the curve as flat and as short as possible. That's our job here, right? We've got to make this curve, because we have to go through it, because we're human beings, because we're all designed this way, because it's stamped in our DNA, because that's what happened millions of years ago. So we've got to help our people and ourselves go through the change curve as flat as we can and as quickly as we can. Otherwise, we'll have people still resisting a decision that you made 6 months ago. new goals and objectives, new KPIs that you put into place 6 months ago, and there are still people saying, well, why does it have to be this way? In my day, it looked like this. And they're talking about the past. What are they really talking about? Well, they're talking about when things were more comfortable than they are now. Okay? Okay, terrific. So that's the change curve. That's what's going on. And we have to make it do this, and we have to make it do this. And we'll talk about how to do that in a upcoming episode. But as I said earlier in the honeycomb model, this resistance to change, once we understand it, where are we? Once we're understanding it, right, we can help people commit to it. And that's our job to do. Now, is this all conceptual or is it technical? This is entirely conceptual. This is beliefs and values and core values. That's where this lives. This is in the 6 inches between our ears. So if that's true, that this is a conceptual challenge, which it is, born of a biological makeup of being a human being, how do we help people through the change curve? If it's conceptual, well, if it's conceptual, the only tool that we have is coaching, right? We don't manage people through the change curve. We don't bark at them to cheer up, right? Because barking at someone to cheer up is the absolute best way to have them be less cheery about anything, right? So we don't manage through the change curve. We actually have to coach people through the change curve. Why? Because it's conceptual, not technical. Okay. So let's take a little break. Let's press the pause button for a second, stretch our mental legs, and then we're going to talk about another cool model I'd like you to think about, which is Kurt Lewin's change model. So whilst I said let's press pause and stretch our mental, I didn't actually literally mean press pause. Well, unless you want to, in that case, go for that, but come back. So let's dive into something equally important, I think. It's a leadership health check. Look, if you want to be an extraordinary leader, and I'm guessing that's why you're here, it's essential to know where you're starting from, right? Could be here, for example. What are the gaps holding you back, and how are those gaps affecting you? How are those gaps affecting your team? How are those gaps affecting your business? So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to take our leadership health check. I can tell you where that is in a second. And you're going to look at the results and you might be a bit grumpy about them. And what you'll do is you'll find yourself quick as a flash right here at this very point here. But with knowing what we've talked about today, I'm hoping you're going to get over here as quickly as possible. So once you know what the issues are, and then you can intentionally understand it and then make a commitment to growing, right? You'll close those gaps and you'll build on your strengths and you'll address your weaknesses. Okay, cool. So that's the power of the leadership health check tool. So let's talk about Kurt Lewin. What Kurt Lewin said, and no one can argue with Kurt Lewin because he was a genius. He said, look, whilst ever in any business, we have like a standard way of doing things, our standard MO, right? Obvious. It's how does your business operate? If you think about it, how does your team operate? If you think about it, how do your people operate? If you think about it, how do you operate, right? We all have kind of standard patterns and standard ways of doing things, standard ways of thinking about things. We ought to do a video, and I think we will, coming up about our thoughts. What percentage of our thoughts are positive? What percentage of our thoughts are negative? We have many more, again, because we're human beings, many more negative thoughts than positive thoughts. Do we have to have? No, we just need to be intentional about it. Intentionality is so important. How do we deal with that? How do we understand that? Well, again, talk to your coach, take an assessment, start journaling. Okay, lecture over. But look, every organization, every person, every team, we have a way of doing things. And Kurt Lewin says, that way of doing things, that MO, we are locked and it's frozen. I almost broke into Disney song then. Right, so we're frozen. The situation is frozen. It's if you want to think about it another way, it's locked in. It's just how we do things around here. It's just our way of thinking. It's our MO. And Kurt Lewin said, look, if we have to change, the first thing we have to do is recognize these patterns that we're locked into, this frozen way of thinking, frozen way of behaving. So before we can change, the first thing we have to do is unfreeze. We've got to unfreeze those locked in thoughts, those locked in behaviors. Before we can change, before we can move, we have to unfreeze everything that's kind of locked together, right? We've got to really prepare for the consequences of the change. We have to unfreeze it. What he then said, it's slightly tortuous and oblique language, but what he then said was, we then have to translate, and really that just means move. So we've unfrozen, we've recognized that we've got a particular locked in way of doing things. We've got to prepare, and when I say prepare for the change, that means start to communicate, to signal, to plan, so everybody knows that the change is coming, right? And what the change looks like and how we're going to adapt and adopt, right? So we then have to then move the organization. We have to translate. That just means move, right? So I'll put that in a bracket, but translate was the word that he used. We have to translate, we have to move that. And then, so that's implementing, right, the change. Okay, so we now have, if you like, old state. We have to transition, and that's implement, right? Transition stroke implement the new processes, procedures, way of doing things, thinking, behaving. You get the stuff, right? Implement the new insert, right? Whatever that is. We then have to refreeze. Which means we have to then, if you like, sort of solidify the new MO, let's say. That's modus operandi, thinking, doing, whatever. What Kurt Lewin then said is, you know what, if you then don't pay enormous attention to the new way of doing things, new way of thinking, new way of acting, new way of communicating, new way of insert something, right? Whatever that change looks like. If we don't pay a lot of attention to it and keep really, really focused on it like a lunatic, what does that mean? It means measurements and KPIs and corrective action and all of that good leadership and management stuff that you know, then it kind of slides back to where it used to be. As soon as you take your eyes off it, it slides back to where it used to be. Why? Because that's the old way of doing things. And the old way of doing things, and we talked about that in our last episode a lot, it has its own weight, it has its own gravity, it has its own inertia, right? And so the old way of doing things, everybody wants to kind of go back into that kind of groove. Because we knew that groove, it was a comfortable groove, it was a comfort zone thing, right? We didn't have to face the reality of the new way of doing things. So if we take a situation and unfreeze it, move it, right, take some effort, and then refreeze it, unless we keep paying attention to it, it slides back. And that feels fairly obvious, and we can get that. So what does that mean? That means that once we've unfrozen it, translated it, made the change, and then refreeze it. Once we have refrozen it, you get the idea. Okay, once it's refreezed, if we're not careful, it slides back this way, right? So I'm going back that way, but we don't want that. So what we have to constantly do is all the bits that then are not right, because when we make a change, is it going to be perfect? No. Is everybody going to be happy? No. We have to keep going back to it and go back to it. And the bits that we don't like, Unfreeze, change, refreeze. Bits we don't like, circumstances change. Circumstances always change, right? There's only, well, everyone used to say there are two certainties in life, death and taxes. I think there are three, death and taxes and change, apart from vending machines, right? But we've got death and taxes and change. It's a certainty in life. So as I said earlier, as a leader, we have to be real agents of change. And it helps us to understand, what does change look like? That was the previous model. Why are we resistant to it? That was what we've talked about so far. And then what do? We take a situation that we want to change that's locked in. We have to unfreeze it. And that takes a lot of communication, takes a lot of planning. Unfreeze it, get prepared for the change it, right? Implement the new whatever. Refreeze it, lock it in. That means KPIs, measurements, things that we pay attention to tend to improve. That's the Hawthorne effect. You all know about that, right? And then make things, will they then stand still for the rest of eternity? No, they won't. It's going to need unfreezing, moving, and freezing, unfreezing. And it's this cycle, this change cycle, that Kurt Lewin, so it's a Kurtlewin. If you want to know more about that, have a look at the Kurt Lewin change model. The guy is a genius, right? And it'll really help you understand how to, it won't help you necessarily get through the change curve more quickly, but it'll help you understand, hey look, the change curve is a condition of humans, and as a consequence of DNA and comfort zones and our amygdala, our lizard brain, it stops us, it keeps us frozen where we are. Kurt Lewin talks all about how to organizationally move a business through the change model. The way to do that will help you. Okay, so the answer was, we gave you the answer. All right, great. So I think that's enough for today. So let me thank you once again for tuning in. I hope you found the change model or Mr. Lewin's model useful. I hope there was something that you can take straight away into your life. Thanks for tuning in to Stop Managing and Start Leading, my daily leadership podcast. And listen, whatever your reason for listening or watching in or stopping by today, I hope it gave you something, even if it's just a reminder of something you already knew. That's terrific, because just one tool, one tip, one reminder, anything that improves your leadership by just 1% every day, that's the best I can hope for. Remember, there's immense power in marginal gains consistently applied over time. Can't beat it. Power in community too. So share your questions, share your insights, share your topic suggestions. Genuinely, we'll do something. We'll help you out in the comments. That's if you're watching on YouTube. And whilst you're down there, give the video a like. Come on. Subscribe too. You know you want to. And for our auditory learners, you're only getting half the story. Head over to our YouTube channel where hopefully these things have really come to life. Visual notes, models, drawings, and all that kind of stuff. Thanks to Cornelia. Our models are also available as a complimentary download at www.mydailyleadership.com. I guess I ought to thank Oscar too for putting these videos together. Thanks, Oscar. And in the next episode, we'll be changing things up a bit, and we're going to share, this is going to be cool, a story about, I don't know if you can see them up there, Russian nesting dolls. Wait, what? Yeah, you heard right. Russian nesting dolls. Lot to do with leadership. If you're curious, do join us. It's a brilliant, powerful metaphor with an even more powerful lesson to improve your leadership. And hey, we talk about Rolls Royces. What could be better? I'm Antonio Garrido with My Daily Leadership. Thanks for being here. Love you lots like jelly tots. Until next time, by wisdom and effort. See you soon.